The news is killing you. Information consumption is like a drug addiction. That desire to always know what's going on, to constantly scroll, read, watch, click, and consume. It feels like today you have to know everything about everything. Every detail of every war, what President A or B said or didn't say, how the economy is fantastic, but actually society is collapsing. Job growth is up, but it's all gig economy jobs that pay nothing, along with massive job losses every single week. What is up? What is down? It's just awful. Besides being confusing and convoluted, the bias, propaganda, and PR is out of control. Politics have always been heated, but ever since 2015 or so, I feel like everyone's brains have broken. It feels like we live in an alternate reality where every day we're subjected to something completely insane, and everyone just shrugs and carries on like nothing is wrong. Not only that, everything is so tense, fiery, and political. Let's say you have an opinion on literally anything. Someone out there adores you, and someone hates you. There's seemingly no in between anymore, no room for peace. I don't know about you, but I'm exhausted. So what if I told you that knowing less is sometimes better than knowing more, especially when it comes to your mental health? I know that might sound strange, especially from someone that often advocates for you to never stop searching, but there is science behind this idea. Don't be ignorant. Don't ignore the facts of the world around you. But do realize that this societal emphasis on always staying informed might not actually be good for you. This excessive political awareness of everything, everywhere, all the time, can in fact be detrimental to your well-being, stealing away time from the more crucial aspects of life, such as your family, friends, and passions. What about that hobby you always wanted to get into? Why not start today? Dive into that passion you say you never have time for as you endlessly doom scroll. Give your brain a little break. The world we live in today is so divided, aggressively so. People can agree on 99% of things, but that 1% difference is enough to burn bridges for some people. We need to take a step back. Okay, let's be honest, we need to take a massive leap back. Information addiction is yet another modern epidemic, as Americans are already poisoned by our terribly unhealthy food, dulled down by our lead pipe contaminated microplastic water, physically exhausted by intense mind-numbing laborious jobs, and let's face it, most of us are struggling with our mental health. The point is, we are fighting a war on so many fronts right now, literally and figuratively. Why add on another unhealthy and toxic war into the mix, especially one you can avoid here and there? When it comes to politics, we all suffer. Anger, confusion, shock, hope, loss, it's a taxing thing. You have one party that hates you and wants to cut taxes for the rich. Then you have another party that hates you slightly less and wants to cut taxes for the rich. There is apparently no room for anyone outside of the allowable spectrum of debate, at least politically, on the national stage. You aren't A or B? Well, the rest of the alphabet doesn't exist. One stands for war and genocide, and the other side stands for war and genocide. With friends like these, who needs enemies? The Overton window has shifted so far to the right that even looking back to ostensibly left policies from the 1940s and 1950s would be too far, too radical today. Healthcare? Ha! How about no care? A war on poverty? Nah, let's have a war on poor people. All of the great economic achievements of the last century, the minimum wage, the 40-hour work week, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, we can't do those things now. They would be impossible to pass today, thanks to this insane and violent political divide where neighbors can live right next to each other, but live in completely different realities. We can't improve society. We can't afford to make things better. Obviously, how are we going to pay for it? I'm sure you've heard that a million times. But anytime a bank, a corporation, an industry, or Wall Street needs some financial help, these politicians who scream, "How are we gonna pay for it?" magically find the money to bail them out. Where there's a will, there's a way, and there is no will today, at least not for us. We don't matter to them because we aren't paying them. It's a cruel, corrupt, and unfunny joke. And get this, every single issue that makes us suffer has a solution. But we live in a state of constant we can't-ism. Politicians fight and yell and argue on TV like they're the biggest of enemies, but then they party with each other on the weekend while sharing insider stock tips. It's all trash, and the point of this video is to help you pull back a little bit, to help you stop fighting on behalf of people that genuinely don't care about you. Relax. Go watch some YouTube videos. If we're all hamsters running on a wheel, slow down. You're stressing yourself out. If we can't find a way off this ridiculous ride, then let's all walk slower. Reality is what you make it. And realistically, we've got maybe 3 or 4 politicians on the national level who genuinely seem to care about us and our well-being, but they have no power. 3 or 4 versus hundreds. means we lose every single fight, every time. Which also means despair and distrust in our institutions. It's a vicious cycle that keeps getting worse. I helped elect this one good person, and they can't override hundreds of mediocre to awful people. It's exhausting. Millions of Americans have and are experiencing fatigue, insomnia, aggression, hopelessness, and even suicidal thoughts due to politics. Young people in particular are disproportionately affected, with depression and suicidal ideation at record levels. And this all unfortunately makes sense. We have greater access to information, news, and knowledge now than at any time in the history of the world. Just think about that for a second. Anything you want to know, you could read about it right now. That is power beyond what any person could have dreamed of 50 years ago. We used to have 30 minutes of news on TV. Before that, we had newspapers printed daily or weekly. Oftentimes, news from the other side of the world never reached our ears. The world was smaller, so the stress was smaller. Back then, you just believed what you heard, or tried to find it in an outdated book. Now you can look up why things are so bad and what's the cause of it. It's money in politics, by the way. Now information is everywhere. It never stops, it never slows down, every second of every day. This is both really cool and completely overwhelming. Finding the balance between being informed and being overwhelmed is a difficult act, but it's one that you need to do. If you wanted to, you could pick a country at random and read every single news story about it that came out today. That is a concept has never existed before the very recent modern era. We as a species, as an animal, haven't learned how to process this much information without getting overloaded. It's overwhelming, and people are cracking. Unsurprisingly, studies and polls show that politically informed youth face more pronounced mental and physical symptoms than even adults. And this makes perfect sense. Stagnating wages, unaffordable housing, bloated student loan debt, layoffs every week, unaffordable education and healthcare, and politics being as abysmal as ever. With seemingly no hope for a better world, why wouldn't they have more pronounced mental and physical symptoms? When all the doors to opportunity close, what do? Well, you get depressed. A lot of older people don't realize how hard it is today, especially for young people. For example, the baby boomer generation owns over 70% of this country's wealth. And that makes perfect sense. They were born into America's greatest economy. When they were growing up, the wealth and income inequality was at the lowest it had ever been, meaning the rich had it good, but the poor also had it pretty good. Now it's dramatically flipped where the rich have it unbelievably good, and the poor in the middle class, well, they're just completely screwed. So what about millennials? How much wealth do you think they hold? If baby boomers hold over 70%, what do millennials have? Take a guess. I mean, there's only 30% give or take to share between the remaining silent generation, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z. The correct answer is 4.6%. Millennials own just 4.6% of the United States of America's wealth. Just 4.6% of the richest country in the history of the world. But it's actually a lot worse than that. Mark Zuckerberg, creator of Facebook, weird strange alien, and multi-billionaire, owns 2% of that 4.6%. So in actuality, millennials own 2.6% compared to over 70%. 2.6% compared to 70+%. Now you can hopefully understand why no one can afford a home. Millennials are the largest workforce in all of America, and yet also the poorest. I can't imagine how bad it's going to be for Gen Z and the upcoming Gen Alpha. They don't stand a chance. So let's look at some more stats. Some would call these fun facts without the fun. The average 64 to 75-year-old American is 94% wealthier than the average 35-year-old today. 94% wealthier. 10% less? I could see that. Makes sense. With age and wealth accumulating over time, compounding interest. I get it. 10% sure. Even 15% less. I can understand that because of how bad things have gotten. 30%, in my opinion, is a systemic failure. 50% would be unimaginable in a world that made sense. And yet it's 94%. 94% wealthier than the average 35-year-old today. Here's another one. Today's 40-year-olds own half the wealth of older generations when they were at the same age. Just look at this chart and tell me this isn't a major crisis. When I look at this, all I can think is that the American dream is dead. Like the late and great George Carlin once said, it's called the American dream because you have to be asleep to believe it. But sure, let's keep worrying about dumb stuff that doesn't monetarily improve people's lives as the most important issue. Or funding God knows how many wars overseas that we don't need to be a part of. Instead, let's keep demonizing young people trying to find an economic system that could hopefully work for them instead of, fixing the current iteration of capitalism that has led to such devastating results for them. When you look at this chart, does it start to make sense why so many young people say, I don't think this system is working for me. I'm going to try and find an alternative. Just think about it. If you made your money while the getting was good, you're good. But now, there's not much left. You're fighting with 60 to 70 million others for your share of that 2.6%. And most of the 70+% of wealth is going to be sucked up by end-of-life care, hospital bills, expensive prescriptions, and funeral costs. I know that's dark, but it's true, and corporations are eagerly waiting for that day. It's an inevitable outcome that is going to play out over the next few decades. Hear me now, believe me later. Then we have the 2024 presidential election. Here we go once again, a repeat round of two geriatrics struggling to get a coherent sentence out. Both are long past their primes and should be in nursing homes or sent home to live with their families, but instead, we have them going at it again. I understand that some of you love one or the other, but you can probably be honest in this moment and agree that we can do better. One refused to have a primary, and the other refused to show up to their primary. And these are our choices? Every election cycle, it's two people no one wants, that polls consistently show are detested and unwanted, and yet here they are again. Pick your poison, America. I heard that one bombs slightly more compassionately than the other. And when it comes to third parties, there's no support. Mainstream media news sources refuse to cover them fairly, if at all, and are blocked out of our two-party system. They either aren't on the state's ballots or they don't get enough support to matter, so we're always stuck with President A or President B, the lesser of two evils. I heard this phrase years ago, and it's always stuck with me. By voting for the lesser evil, you're still voting for evil. So instead of voting for who would help us the most, you have to play some political calculi to determine which one is going to hurt you the least. It's insanity, and sometimes it feels like you're better off not knowing. Did you hear that? I said the thing. The point I'm trying to make is that yes, everything is on fire and the emperor isn't wearing any clothes. It's a horrible garbage fire of a show, but you don't have to let it take over your mental health. Yes, it's bad, and you should do your part in making things better, but you can't let it destroy you. I've seen this happen to too many people. I've seen families broken apart, loved ones refusing to talk to one another, and people checking out of politics completely. That's what they want. Tired, exhausted, and broken worker bees. Engage when you can, and disengage when you need a break. It's okay to not know everything. It's okay to take time off and enjoy your life. Taking a balanced approach to news consumption is a great way to avoid the never-ending barrage of politics. No friend is going to attack you over not knowing what happened last Tuesday. And if they do, well, maybe they aren't really a good friend to you. Ignorance on the issues and in voting is what destroyed this country for the millennials and younger people inheriting it, but overindulging in misery is personally detrimental to your mental health. It's a tightrope, and you have to walk it carefully. I understand the desire to give up and check out, and I also understand the desire to just vote whatever you were told and not think about it. But staying informed is important. Doing the right thing is important. Fighting for what you believe in is important. But so is taking a break if you need one. The never-ending nonsense will be here when you get back. Until next time, take a break. It's okay.